Hello, good people. It's great to be back with you. This is part 4 in my series that started off talking about chickens and eggs. And now I want to take that topic and I really want to expand out and look at a much larger framework for this whole thing, and that is of our entire economy and food system. Now, while this pandemic is going on, there has been a lot of questions about food security and about supply chains and whether we're going to have plenty of access to food here in the United States. This is not a new question for the people who have been looking at our food system for a long time. In some ways, we could say it might be a question of what you are calling food. Do you define food as simply anything that a human being can put in their mouth and chew and swallow? Or do you define food as that which really nourishes the human body? If we define food as nourishment, then we would discover that we have been, over the past few decades, having food shortages already, and they have been steadily increasing. This is because we live under the illusion that there is such a thing as cheap food. Right now in the United States, around 40% of the food that is sold and consumed by people has almost no nutritional value. It is ultra-processed junk that masquerades as food. Some people call it food-like substances. Even the food that's not ultra-processed, the fresh food, like fruits and vegetables, is greatly diminished in its nutritive value. This is because of the way it is farmed. Nutritional assays of fruits and vegetables show a steady decline in their nutrient density since the middle of the 20th century. And this would coincide with the advent of widespread industrial agriculture in the United States. The same depletion of nutrients is also happening in the food that is fed to livestock. So, what is industrial agriculture? Then another question might be whether there's an alternative to industrial agriculture. In my video about having backyard chickens, I mentioned the urging of the government for families to grow food in their backyards and have their own chickens and be responsible for their own production of food for their family during the 2 world wars. And this was before industrial agriculture had really taken hold in the United States and had replaced the kind of agriculture that the country started with, and that was agrarian agriculture. Now, a lot of times the word agrarian is simply used as a synonym for agriculture, but while the word agriculture refers to producing from the land, either directly in terms of fruits, vegetables, nuts, etc., crops, you would say, or indirectly in terms of animals, the word agrarian refers instead to the kind of relationship the producers of the agricultural products have with the land, and also with the place that this production has within the wider economy. Agrarian agriculture depends upon certain societal structures and attitudes. In order for agrarian agriculture to be successful, there has to be a widespread understanding that industry depends upon agriculture, not vice versa. In terms of economic incentives, it has to be recognized that agrarian agriculture cannot compete with industrialization. This is because industrial processes are not suitable for dealing with living things. Industrial processes are extractive. For example, think of a silver mine. The company mining silver intends to extract as much of the silver as they can from the mine. And then They will do this by making a calculation. They'll leave some silver in there because it will just get to the point where it's, according to the law of diminishing returns, there's so little silver left that it no longer is economically feasible for them to go after every last little molecule of it. And so they will always make this calculation that they want to, the amount of money that they're going to spend extracting the silver, of course, has to be less than the amount of money they're going to make from the silver, otherwise it's not profitable. So there might become a point in the extraction process where the amount of effort and investment needed to extract the remaining silver will not yield a profit. And at that point, the enterprise is abandoned and a new site for extraction is located. Now, the company mining the silver does not intend to manage the silver mine in such a way that the silver will continue to be replenished. It's not possible for silver to replenish itself because it is not alive. Industrial processes are very appropriate for dealing with a material like that. They're also appropriate for dealing with as materials after they come out of the ground. Modern industrial processes like mass production, assembly line standardization, etc., create scalable enterprises that can take maximum advantage of what was extracted from the ground. But these things are not true when we're dealing with living systems or living things. This is reminiscent of the conversations that some women had with Jordan Peterson when they would be complaining about the so-called wage gap between men and women. Now, Jordan Peterson would point out that women tended to be interested in the kind of work that was not scalable, and that explained a lot of what you would call the wage gap. Consider a kindergarten teacher. She might be able to handle a class of 10 or 15 kindergartners, but she's not going to be able to handle a class of 300 of them. Or consider a nurse. A nurse might be able to care for half a dozen patients on her shift, but she couldn't care for 30 of them. Now, what if we were to insist that the teacher, for the sake of the economics of education, had to handle a class of 300 kindergartners? Maybe she could do it using cages and drugs. Maybe we would insist, for the sake of economics of medicine, that the nurse has to take care of 30 patients, or why not 50? In each of these cases, there would be a cost. In one case, the cost of damaging the children, and in the other case, the cost of the poor outcomes for the patients. But of course, we don't do that because we recognize these other costs in terms of the damaged children or the damaged patients is too great to bear. So we don't do that. We have some prior value. We don't look at this strictly in terms of economy, monetary terms, right? There's some other value that has to drive these decisions for how we will scale that particular kind of care that's needed by living things. Now, in an agrarian agriculture, we would recognize that the farmer is more like that nurse or that teacher than he is like a factory owner or the manager of an industrial plant. His work is not scalable in the same way that industry is. And that when we attempt to scale it in the same way as we do industry, there are costs and there is damage. We have to see and recognize the cost in order to make a decision about the value of the products of agriculture. That is why I asked you in my first video about chickens to make a commitment to buying those 50-cent eggs. You remember those $6 a dozen eggs, the ones from the pastured chickens that are fed organically. Why? Was in order to be able to understand whether it would be economically feasible for you to keep your own chickens. This is an example of how agrarian agriculture cannot compete with industrial agriculture if we look at it purely in terms of dollars. And of course, if we confine our vision very narrowly, so we ignore the costs on one end, do we really think that there is no cost to requiring one of our fellow human beings to torture chickens so that we can have eggs at a price that suits us? Our current situation with this coronavirus is making it more clear than ever that industrial agriculture has failed us. The areas in which it fails are food security, nutrition, soil health, biodiversity, the ecology, the environment, in terms of moral principles of subsidiarity and solidarity. These things are all interrelated. In terms of food security, we see there are questions right now regarding the fragility of our supply lines and just-in-time industrial processes applied to agriculture. The idea that we have sacrificed resilience for efficiency has become a common trope. Many people are saying that and recognizing it. But I'm a little bit skeptical about the use of this word efficiency in this particular context, because nature has its own efficiency that might look like waste to us. In other words, even in terms of the industrial agriculture, what we are calling efficiency might not be efficiency at all if we just look at it more broadly. So now when we are questioning our food security, we can see the wisdom of having a food network rather than these straight supply lines, a food network that is more widely dispersed, closer to people with built-in redundancies. Now, in permaculture design, there is a principle we say that every element of our design should support more than one function, and every function should be supported by more than one element. We use the saying that one is none and two is one. So we see that redundancies give us the security. But a more widely distributed food system is also related to the issue of nutrition. The production of fruits and vegetables in the United States has become a matter of mining minerals in California and distributing them throughout the country in the bodies of vegetables, which are depleted more and more in nutrient value as every year goes by and as the soil becomes ever more depleted. The same thing is true of the monocrop cultures that are used to feed our animals. What is not in the soil is not in the plants. What is not in the plants is not in the people and the animals. A more distributed food system with production throughout the country would result in greater biodiversity. We're losing the genetic diversity of our domesticated crops. It used to be that every region had its own particular things, every small town and village, sometimes even down to specific plantations or farms, had their own special varieties, maybe of onions, maybe squashes, or tomatoes, or cabbages, or something like that. Vidalia onions are named after a town in Georgia. So this was the biodiversity that we used to have, and it wasn't just in the plants, but also even in the animals would be somewhat distinct. These distinctive varieties, by the way, are called land races. Today, if you go to some big store like Lowe's or Home Depot or something to buy plant starts, little plants that you put out into your vegetable garden, you'll get the same varieties all over the country. Whether you're in Wisconsin or New Jersey or Alabama, it doesn't matter. You get the same plants, and usually they are hybrids, meaning that you can't save the seeds from them and grow them again the following year. It's the same standardization that causes us to not even be able to recognize one street from another in various cities throughout the country, because wherever you go, you see the same set of chain franchise stores out everywhere. This biodiversity that we're losing represents a heritage of careful breeding that was done throughout generations by our ancestors. It represents a reservoir of strength against blights and diseases. The standardization itself, while looking very efficient, represents a danger to our food security. The depletion of our soils due to modern industrial agriculture is a serious environmental and health hazard. Soil cannot be taken care of industrially because it is a living thing. Now, there's a lot of talk about taking care of the earth. We just had Earth Day last month. We can't really take care of the earth. From a technical angle, we can't even really harm the earth unless we figure out some way to knock it out of its orbit. I'm sure somebody's working on that somewhere in some laboratory. What we can harm is the soil, and we can do damage to the environment, which is the home to the human beings and to the other living species on our world. The relationship between the soil biology and human health is something that we're only beginning to understand. We have just scratched the surface of this, and it's a field of study that is quite exciting. Now, consider the fact that it's only been for the past few years that we have begun to focus on and understand our own gut health, right? You never used to hear about your gut microbiome, 20, 30 years ago. That's a kind of a new thing that everybody is very aware of, because we've come to understand that we do not digest all of our own food. We are in a relationship with billions of other living things that live inside of us, a tiny microbial life in the form of mostly bacteria. And they provide a service for us by helping us to digest our food. And they also provide us with vitamins and with such things as serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. It has also been discovered that serotonin is produced by some of the bacteria in the soil. So when you have contact with the soil, serotonin gets into you through your skin and through your breathing from the soil bacteria. So just like we don't digest our own food, plants do not send their roots into the ground like straws and simply suck up nutrients. Rather, plants use their roots to send chemicals called exudates, sugars and other compounds that call to the roots of the plant the soil microbiology, which is nematodes and bacteria and fungi. The plant calls these things to it, and they feed it. So plants exist in a very complex web of relationships with all the soil biology. The soil biology also serves as a communication network between different plants, even between plants of different species. And we barely understand how any of this works. We don't even know all of the things that live in the soil. We don't even know what their functions are. We haven't even identified all of them. And yet you'll have people who hubristically think that they can take plants completely out of the ground and grow them hydroponically, and just give them a few key nutrients that we happen to know about, and that they will still provide enough nutrition for the human body. So we've subjected our animals to lonely and unnatural conditions, and now we are doing the same to our plants. And the loneliness and unnatural conditions that this virus is making us live in might give us some sense of what we've been doing to the animals and plants. Some people think that our role as humans in the environment is a purely destructive one, and that the earth would be better off without us. This is a terrible thing to think about your own species, my goodness. But human beings are part of nature, and their role in the environment can be very productive, very regenerative, very healing to the environment. It does not have to be destructive. But we have to understand what our ecological niche is. So, what is the ecological niche of a human being when it comes to functioning in our environment and ecology? Well, the human being is a top predator. We are the top predator in every environment that we go into. It's because we've got these opposable thumbs. That's what we've got. That's our advantage. Okay, so what ecological service does a top predator perform? The top predator performs the ecological service of increasing the fertility of the landscape and improving its prey species by moving the prey species through the landscape. There's a great example of this, and I'm going to put a link in the description to a video about this. This is to do with the wolves in Yellowstone. You may have heard of this or you may not have, I don't know, but it is just an amazing thing. Because they took the wolves out of Yellowstone, I guess, to protect the human beings, right? And so the ecology of Yellowstone just started to degrade horribly. And so what they did was they had to put the wolves back in so that they could perform their natural function of moving the deer species through the landscape, preventing overgrazing and water erosion. And once the wolves were reestablished in Yellowstone, the ecology was rebalanced. Now, the same thing could have been accomplished by humans hunting the deer in Yellowstone. Either way, they would have had the same effect. So it's becoming increasingly understood that the way that we need to be managing our domestic ruminant species, that is, the way that is best for the environment, should mimic the role of the top predator in moving species through the environment. This increases the fertility of the landscape. And I'm going to put a link in the description to the work of Alan Savory. He's been studying and advocating for humans to mimic the role of the top predator and move their domestic animals through the landscape for the good of the ruminants and for the good of the landscape to increase its fertility. This is what pastoralists have done for, thousands of years, and now we're beginning to understand the wisdom of these ancient methods of caring for animals. You might wonder, okay, well, I'm talking about this, but how am I doing this on my small piece of property with my chickens? Because I did say that my chickens are confined to a chicken house and run, or chicken house and yard, and they're not being moved through the landscape. And the answer is that I am accomplishing the same thing because I'm composting my chicken manure, and I am moving the compost through the landscape and using it to fertilize the plants that are in the landscape, both the ornamental plants and also the plants that we eat, the garden plants that we eat. So this way, see, I become a node in the network of communication that cycles between my animals, the plants they eat, the soil biology of the land, and my own gut biology when I eat both from the landscape and from the animals. You see? That's how it works. Then everybody is happy. Okay, the plants are happy, the animals are happy, and I'm happy because we're all getting all that serotonin going in the soil and in the gut bacteria of the animals and of the humans. And we're constantly hearing about people suffering from anxiety and a sense of alienation. And of course, you're going to feel alienated if you're not connected with your food and with the soil that produces it. Food is information for your gut microbiome. If you're feeding garbage to yourself in the form of highly processed food that comes from far away, then you're basically telling your gut microbiome that you're existing in a state of starvation. Your gut microbiome is not stupid. Those little bacteria are not going to produce serotonin to make you feel happy and content. They're going to produce chemicals that affect your brain and make you want to move. They would make you anxious and alienated because they're trying to get you to go somewhere where there is food. Now, I'm not a farmer. I'm just a gardener with some backyard chickens. But even the small area that I have to care for and the small number of animals I have to care for requires loving attention. Agrarian agriculture requires loving attention from the farmer. And this kind of loving attention is not possible to be given in an industrial scale. Instead, it can only really be given on the family farm scale, and that would be the multi-generational family farm. On family farming family on the land, because only then can they give the land the kind of loving attention that it needs and the kind of, and pass on the kind of knowledge of the land that you have when you have generation after generation living on a particular piece of land. We have a very romantic idea of family farming in the United States. Everybody pays lip service to it. Meanwhile, our entire economic system is designed to destroy it. Well, we have created an economic system that is asking our farmers to live in utter poverty to make a living. And the living they can make is far less than a person working in industry. So you see how flipped around and how crazy this is, because we're making it seem as though we're really reliant upon industry, like industry is at the base and the farming is somewhere else, instead of recognizing that industry depends on the farming. Why is that? It's because the people who work in the industry have to eat. So we have to understand the thing we're really dependent upon is the agriculture, is the agrarian agriculture. Now, if we take the attitude that um, the farming is not that important and that we're better off, the fewer people that we have involved with agriculture, the better. That shows how much progress we've made. Then we've got an unconscionable and unjust system set up. We're not recognizing the proper place of agrarian farming. We have got to insist that there will be parity between agriculture and industry. And that's what agrarianism is about, achieving that parity, that proper recognition of the place of agriculture. And I'm going to include a link to a talk by Wendell Berry. He's advocating for that. We need to recognize that there is a vital ecological service that we all depend upon that is being performed by the agrarian farmer. The agrarian farmer is taking care of mankind's most precious capital resource, and that is our soil. Done properly, agrarian farming can even regenerate depleted soils, making them healthy, making them productive again, so they can be passed on to future generations. If we decide as a matter of public policy that we're not going to pay for that vital ecological service through the cost of food because we want cheap food, then it has to be paid for by some other way. The agrarian farmer has to be able to make a good living. Is that going to be by a subsidy? Possibly, but it cannot be turned into a cash cow for industrial agricultural companies, which is what farming subsidies are now. There are tremendously powerful economic forces against agrarianism and against every kind of sustainability and regeneration. In the name of capitalism and free markets, big corporations are destroying mankind's most valuable capital resource that we all depend on. That's our soil. It's given to us and we need to protect it for the future generations. We cannot live without it. But the capitalist free market system that we live under incentivizes extractive policies for short-term profit. Here's an example of the kind of thing that we're up against when it comes to these issues. Now, in California, there was a permaculture designer who was also a developer, a housing developer, and he developed a subdivision based on permaculture principles. So it was, you know, a very attractive place for people to live. There was an emphasis on them being able to be sustainable in their own yards, grow their own food. You know, many community-based food production systems were put in place right when the housing was put in. And because permaculture design takes the time to really examine water flow, that's one of the most important things in permaculture, is understanding how water flows through a landscape. And in permaculture, what you try to do with the water, in most designs, you're trying to get the water off the land as fast as possible. Not in permaculture. Permaculture, you're trying to slow the water down, sink it, and store it in the landscape as much as possible. And so that's how this entire subdivision was designed. Now, at some point after it was put in and there were people living in that subdivision, there was a huge rain event, a flooding event in the area, and a neighboring subdivision was overwhelmed by the water and was in danger of experiencing flooding in the homes. And they were able to divert water out of that subdivision into this permaculture subdivision, which, because of its good design, was able to absorb that water and protect their neighbors from flooding. You would think that the next time that developer wanted to put in a subdivision, that he would, the county would welcome that another place like that. But no, he could never get another permit to build another one. The reason was that the real estate agent association in the area lobbied against him being able to build again. Well, why did they do that? It was because people loved living there so much that they didn't want to move. The homes were very much in demand in that subdivision. People that already had homes there did not want to leave. They did not want to sell. People would forego having a promotion for their job that would require them to move to another part of the country because they didn't want to leave that neighborhood. Well, that was not in the interest of the real estate agent association, and so they lobbied to keep him from being able to get a permit to build another subdivision along those same lines. So you see, there was a perverse incentive. Their incentive is to keep neighborhoods churning, keep houses on the market, keep families moving around all the time, and that's how they would best make their money. They're not incentivized to want neighborhood stability. So we have all kinds of perverse incentives like this all over our economic system. Industrial agriculture is profitable, but it is extractive, and it manages to hide a lot of its costs. For example, industrial agriculture of animals, called factory farming, demands that animals be fed in concentrated animal feeding operations called CAFOs. Now, the concentration of the animals turns the manure, which should be a valuable resource used on the landscape to increase fertility, it turns it into a pollutant. It harms waterways, it harms the quality of the air, and it even puts into the environment superbugs. These are antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They come from the fact that the animals are fed low-dose antibiotics in order to help them deal with the very crowded conditions and to make them grow faster. Now, who pays for the cost of that pollution and the degradation of human health when superbugs arrive in these conditions and then spread to humans? It's not the agricultural industry. They don't pay for it. It's all the rest of us that pay for it. They have become experts at privatizing their profits and socializing their costs. Another example of this is the food program, and I think it's a very good thing to have support for food for people who are of low income, who need assistance. And food assistance should support people in having nutrition. But instead, what happens is that billions and billions of these dollars, our tax dollars at work, billions and billions of these dollars go instead to these companies selling highly processed junk food. Coca-Cola makes billions of dollars every year off of the food assistance program. Now, who then pays for the cost of the damage done to the health of the people who eat this junk food and who then need assistance for medical care? Well, once again, it's the rest of us that take up that cost, because it's not as though the food company goes, "Oh yes, we have given these people diabetes, so we will help them. Now we will pay for their medical care." Not on your life. That's not going to happen. That's another cost of the food that is not borne by the corporations, but it gets shoved out to everyone else. Now, I understand there's all kinds of reasons to be suspicious that with any attempt to interfere in the free market. I understand that. However, we have interfered with free markets before when we've realized that the free market was not was operating in such a way that it was not valuing things that we had to value. I mean, slavery was free market, right? Slaves were bought and sold on the free market. They were used in production, and they were used for profit. That was the whole point. If there was no profit in it, it wouldn't have been done. Now, of course, there were all kinds of costs borne by the society, the main one being that the people, by not being free, were not able to develop themselves and fully contribute to the society. So the whole society bears a certain cost when you have something like slavery, like we had in the United States. And, at some point, that free market activity had to stop. You can no longer make the argument validly that, well, there's profit in it, because we don't care if there's profit in it, it's wrong, period, right? When the Industrial Revolution first happened, they had factories and you had child labor in the factories. Well, it's profitable for the factory owners to have the children working and pay them very little. And, at some point as a society, we said, well, we're sorry, we realize you're making a profit here using the children working in the factory. But, the rest of the society is bearing the costs and the broken bodies and minds of these children, and they're not able to go to school and, become as productive citizens as they might be otherwise. Their education is interfered with. And so we're not going to have this child labor going on anymore. So we interfered with the free market in that aspect. Later on, there was interference of the free market by, having certain laws restricting how many hours a person could work, or how many under what working conditions they could work. We've had to, at various times, interfere with certain free market things based on a certain value. Okay, so I think it's time for us to say to industrial agriculture, yes, we understand that you are making a good profit. However, you are abusing animals. You are harming your fellow citizens with the food that you are producing. And the cost to our society is just too much to bear. So in the meantime, what do we do until we can get public policy to catch up with justice in this area? How can we operate? Well, I think that as an individual, you can do just as much as you possibly can do to take responsibility for your own soil, whatever soil you have, whatever land you have, however small it is, even if it's like 1/10 of an acre. Start with your own backyard and take responsibility for growing as much of your own food as you can. Try to work with your neighbors wherever you can, so that you can get changes in local ordinances that may interfere with people having the right to use their own property to produce food for themselves and for their family. And you can cooperate and do exchanges with your neighbors. You can support local farmers as much as you possibly can. Be very conscious of where your food dollars go. Right now, I'd say that one of the most revolutionary things that you can possibly do is be determined to take as much control of your own food, where it comes from, and your own soil as you can, and trying to regenerate it. I'm very delighted because, I haven't been doing this for a super long time. When my husband and I first moved to this property, we did use chemicals on the ground. We didn't know any better. We did, use insecticides, and we did use herbicides on the ground. And now, having stopped doing that for some years, frogs have come back into our yard. So when you see frogs in your yard, you know that your environment is healthy, because frogs and other amphibians, they breathe through their skin, and they're very, very sensitive to chemicals. So I'm actually thinking about possibly putting a little frog pond in my yard for the frogs. So you can regenerate your own property, your own little piece of land and soil, no matter how small it is, you can do this. The bottom line is that cheap food is an illusion, and it is an illusion that we can no longer afford. So thanks for listening. I know this is a little bit long, but I hope that you will share these thoughts with others, and that together we can make some changes that we really need to make. Until we're together again, treat yourself as though you are someone you are responsible for helping, because you are responsible. So am I, and together we are making the world. Bye for now. Thanks so much for watching.